Well, hi, everyone. It is Lindsay and Justin tuning in today, and we will be covering a very cool project story, which is being part of a team that builds software as a service. So, Justin, I would love to ask some questions and pick your brain and really hear about this really cool project story.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, Justin, you started your career at a company called TSYS. Tell me about them.
All right, so TSYS is headquartered in my hometown, Columbus, Georgia. Columbus is known for really three things. TSYS, which is a major employer, Aflac, the duck from the commercials, and formerly Fort Benning. Those are the three big employers in Columbus, Georgia. I went to work for TSYS within days of graduating from high school because, one, I needed money to go to college. It wasn't going to come from anywhere else. So I needed tuition money and book money, and I needed to buy a car. I didn't have a car growing up, so I needed wheels in order to get to work and to get to school. So all of these things were combined together, and I got a job in the call center of TSYS, where they took phone calls on behalf of major banks around the country, like Bank of America, Nations Bank at the time, Wells Fargo, and a few others. So TSYS, as a broader company, processes credit card transactions. So when we swipe our cards or put in our debit card to pay for things, it has to go through many, many systems to gain an approval or be declined if you don't have any money available, and to do fraud detection and all of that. So TSYS is one of those back ends. They process billions of transactions daily, which is just incredible that all of that data is funneling right here through our home state, Georgia.
Wow, that's huge. And that was based out of Columbus. So
Yes.
That's amazing. So just learned that as a new area for that company. So That's huge. So I've heard you talk about ProphIT, but in this context, what was TSYS ProphIT all about?
Yeah, so there's profit and then there's profit. So profit in the traditional sense, P-R-O-F-I-T, of course, means money that you make as a business or as a person selling goods or services, right? Profit, the way TSYS spelled it, was P-R-O-P-H-I-T, and it was meant to be more like a crystal ball profit. Like, I can see ahead, I can read the future, and like, what was her name? Madame Cleo, way back in the day? Calling now for your free reading.
Sorry.
That was her. So, which is around the time the system was built. Maybe that's where the name came from. So ProphIT was my first exposure to designing and building software as a service. So in a previous episode of this podcast, we talked about a lot of the travels that I've been on around the world early in my career. They were tied to ProphIT. And the reason is we built a platform that was then licensed to major banks around the world. They would license ProphIT, configure it for their business workflows around credit card servicing. And my job was to go and elicit those requirements and help with the configuration activities. But what was really cool is, and I don't think a ton of people, imagine many people had this experience, or at least didn't in the early 2000s. Not only was I gathering requirements to implement the software, but I was designing the infrastructure that was the software. So it's one thing for you to configure it and say, okay, we will approve your credit limit increase if your income is $100,000 and you have a 800 credit score. Let's just make that up. That's a business rule. You configure that. But you have to configure it somewhere, right? So I was creating the somewhere where you would go and configure it, if that makes any sense at all.
Yep.
It's kind of like having the plastic mold to create the Lego blocks and then actually building something with the Lego blocks.
But it's all a process.
Yeah.
You have to have those steps in place.
Yes. So that's what makes this a cool project story for me is I got to learn what it means to build a SaaS product, which I've now done for other companies and for our own company many times now.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. And what was your role working on the platform?
So my role, I was one cog of many. So I wore kind of a dual hat of designer, like a UX designer, creating some of the basic wireframes of what the user interface would look like. And I also did more of the analysis of what the hidden behind the scenes workflows should be. What were the steps in the workflow? What were the business rules? Things like that. My peers on the team, broader than me, were QA testers who tested to make sure it worked. Of course, the developers who coded it, and then higher level architects who had the broader vision of how these different pieces would come together. So it was fun to be part of a big, broader team creating this new platform.
Yeah, so you really could see all the moving parts and then working
Yes.
together as a team to be able to make that mold and then implementing it and testing it and making sure all that works.
Yes. And because this was early in my career, in retrospect, how fortunate was that I got to kind of understand these different roles and gravitate towards what I enjoy
Oh, good
and
point.
and focus on that for my career, at least for the several years thereafter.
Because you actually were able to see all of those things, and then you really could pick some of their brains, I'm sure,
That's
and
right.
ask questions. Like I know you do all the time because you're inquisitive and want to know things and learn as much as you can and absorb like a sponge. So that's huge.
It was cool. TSYS invested in hiring consultants from, I believe at the time it was Hewlett Packard, HP. And those consultants came in mostly from Atlanta down to Columbus. And they had been around the block. They had designed and built systems all over the world. So I enjoyed meeting them, seeing how they just operated with each other in a personal way. Because to that point, I'd only worked with my core little team at TSYS, and I knew the way TSYS did things. These Hewlett Packard consultants came in and taught us different ways of doing things and really opened my eyes. And, you could see amongst the team, the people who were warm to fresh ideas and the ones who kind of dug their heels in and said, well, we've always done it this way. We need to keep doing it this way. So I appreciated that perspective.
But that's a good balance. Sometimes of being able to have that, because sometimes you don't have to recreate the wheel.
That's right.
But there is also benefits to having best perspectives on things and
Yes.
brainstorming ideas and stuff.
That's right.
So that's huge. So how did your team approach the design and development phases of TSYS ProphIT to ensure it met the client's needs?
So that was an interesting thing. It was one of those platforms that was sold before it existed to an extent. So that meant being able to talk about what the platform could eventually do, which meant that tightrope balancing act of here's representing what we envisioned the product could do and gathering requirements from customers who have purchased it, bringing the two together to make sure that, they've signed a contract. The system better do what they've asked it to do. So that was an interesting balancing act on this particular project. And TSYS is not alone. Companies do that all the time. But you do have to be able to think fast and think more broadly than just this client. They may say they want the system to do X, Y, and Z. Is that really good for the health of the overall platform long term? So it's being able to look at those things and make those decisions. So early in my career, I learned a lot about the evaluation criteria that goes into those things to make sure you're making a good decision that benefits the platform long term and not just an immediate need.
Yeah, because that was one thing that just even listening to that was like, does that lead towards longevity?
Yeah.
Does that end up, you anticipate those type of needs to be able to make sure, yes, you have this game plan in front of you, but you still have to add some extra pegs and stuff into the map and the puzzle to be able to make sure that it's longevity and it holds out.
Well, that's right. And what's funny is I recall distinctly taking the first client specification and, stripping out anything proprietary and taking it to the second client and saying, all right, we have a template. We just need to fill this in and we're ready to go. And that client said, oh, no. Our process is totally different than that. And that was good. Thank goodness they didn't just escort us out of the building. They said, no. Here's where it's similar. Here's where it's different. And so once you go through those cycles enough times, you begin to figure out, all right, here's the midpoint. Here's the baseline. And here are those deviations above and below that line. And you figure out what needs to be highly configurable versus core.
Okay. And then how did your first experience with TSYS ProphIT influence your understanding of SaaS development and deployment?
I think that piece of understanding, defining what is your product as a SaaS platform, software as a service, means people are going to be licensing it and it has a purpose. So understanding the vision for that product and making sure that it is responsive to the market you're trying to sell it into. So here's a good example right now here at our company. We're building a platform that's meant to serve a municipal purpose. It's meant to issue licenses and collect tax payments for a very niche area. We have a couple of municipalities that have been good sounding boards, but we're really, really keen on making sure we're not building it just to what they say they need, because what they say they need in Georgia might be different than what they need in Arizona. Okay. So this whole experience with ProphIT helped me understand early on how to have something that, it's kind of the 80-20 rule. If you've heard of the 80-20 rule, you have these things you can build that serve 80% of the requirements. And if you understand there's going to be 20% deviation and customization, that's fine. You can plan for that. You can budget for it from a time and cost perspective, and also design your system the right way to have configurability for those edge cases.
So what were the key takeaways from your first experience working on a SaaS project, and how have they influenced your approach to subsequent SaaS initiatives?
Key takeaways from that experience and subsequent ones really is keeping that eye open for opportunities to build a solid product that's resilient, secure, and meets most of the user's needs, and also allowing myself and allowing the team grace to come up with those configurable options that accommodate uniqueness amongst the customers and the clients who would ultimately buy that platform. We use a ton of SaaS platforms today. We're using Gusto for payroll. We're using Monday as our CRM. We're using Shortcut for backlog management. All of us are familiar with SaaS platforms. I think the key is to be able to give a platform longevity. It has to have those attributes of a solid baseline and excellent configurability for those edge cases.
Awesome. So how did the TSYS ProphIT project contribute to your professional development and growth in the field of software development?
Well, I had good mentors at the time too. I would be remiss not to mention two people specifically, Melissa Wright and Naina Patel. Those are two individuals who meant a lot. They mean a lot to me today. In that context, we worked together. We were friends, and they took good care of me. So they knew I was the newbie, the kid on the block, literally the kid on the block. And they had been further in their career. They're not that much older than me, but they were further along in their career to where they could give me guidance, pull me aside and say, hey, don't do it that way, do it this way. Just general coaching and mentorship, as well as just care, as friends that wanted to see me succeed. And they've continued to have my back even all these years. They're just good people. I'd say that's one of my fondest memories of that period for sure. And I'm grateful that they're still part of my life now.
That's awesome.
Yep.
And that's why you keep those relationships, and that's why you have those mentors.
Oh, yeah.
And you surround those type of people that can pull you aside and feel comfortable enough to go, hey, let's not do it this way.
Yes.
And they want to see you succeed, because that makes all the difference in the world.
Totally. Absolutely does.
Because then you can grow and you can learn more, and they teach you the things, and they teach you things that's not just by the book per se either.
That's right.
That's huge. And that's what allows you to sit here after 20 plus years and being able to give back to people behind you, and being able to sit on podcasts like this and share your knowledge, and being able to get those kind of perspectives that you've gained and knowledge that you've gained over the years.
Every company has those people that are rock stars that will take others under their wing, teach them the ropes and all of that. Melissa and Naina are definitely two of those. And every company has the other type who are a bit more dismissive or don't have time for that. And you think about your colleagues, you know who is who, and you know which ones are going to remain part of your life and have an impact on your career, and which ones will just fall by the wayside. And that's okay.
But you all learn lessons along the way. I mean, you learn something from them as well.
Oh, yeah. What not to do.
What not to do 9 times out of 10.
Which is equally valuable.
Yeah, because you know that doesn't align with what you're wanting for yourself, your career, your business later on in life, if that's the route that you decide to take. If you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently?
Well, in the 553 years since then, there have been lots of technological advances. So I would definitely spend more time from a user experience perspective. I have so much more appreciation for what it means to build personas of the people the system needs to serve, to visualize the workflows and the screens before any software is written. We call it rapid prototyping. That's a tactic we use at APG. And it's where, as you're sharing your requirements, we are rapidly prototyping what that user experience would look like. So there's no guessing. If Lindsay, you say, I need a form to submit time off requests. And, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, you probably need to know what date they're taking for time off. What else? Well, you may have 3 other things you need to capture. Until we actually draw a picture and look at it at the same time, it's hard to get on the same page. So we use that as a consensus building tactic. And I think that's one of those, if I'd known then what I know now, abilities, I would go back in time and rapidly prototype what should this platform look like and how should it behave before having the software developers start coding. They would have saved a lot of time and a lot of money. I think the other comes down to just good, solid documentation. I mentioned earlier user stories and acceptance criteria. It is a smart way to document nuances of a system. it forms a history. It forms a backlog. You can see what's going to be built next, what's already been built, what's ready for testing, all of that stuff. It's just a well-organized way of executing. And those methods were just congealing around that time. And I would totally go back in the time machine and whisper in my ear, hey, write this thing called a user story.
So do you feel like that would have saved a lot of time and then also streamlined a lot of things because that sounds like to me that that's another form of like true communication, especially when you have too many hands in the cookie jar.
That's right.
And it's a whole team working on things that sometimes that's just difficult.
It is.
And you think, I mean, working with different types of people and stuff and how they absorb things and how each person works and thinks is already
yes,
a big task and a big hurdle to jump over. But being able to have that system that documents things in like a paper trail, and also being able to save that time instead of so many back and forths.
That's right.
And you have something to reference to.
I'll say in the years since we at various companies and in our own company now, right, we have tried a lot of different tools and methods, and it's an ever-changing process, and things are continuing to get better. So I would just, advise everyone, keep an eye out. Don't be afraid to get that free trial and kick the tires on the system to see if it serves you better than what you're doing today.
Yeah, and do some research and check in with other people in your industry.
Yes.
To see if it's working for them. Because a lot of those tools are built towards specific industries a lot of times. Mm-hmm. So tap into that. Just because this one has worked for this many years doesn't mean that you can't evolve to try something new.
Absolutely.
And see if this works for you.
Absolutely. And there are platforms where we're building in no-code platforms today. I know that sounds like an oxymoron to say you're developing software with no code, but we are. And those abilities definitely did not exist way back then. But if they had, things like ProphIT that we built that cost millions of dollars and years of time could be done for hundreds of thousands of dollars or less now in months of time. And it's just fantastic that we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, and who knows, in another 20 years, what this is going to be like.
Well, I know we'll speak into these microphones and say, I need an application to do X, Y, and Z, and it's getting close to that. Yeah. We're right on the cusp of that now.
Yeah.
It'll get there.
That's huge. Well, thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great talking.